Welcome to The Application, the podcast series from Side Business School, featuring some of the extraordinary personalities who were offered a place on the Executive MBA here at Oxford University. I'm Kathy Harvey. As Associate Dean, I've been involved with the people who've embarked on this journey for over half the 20 years since the programme was established. This is my chance to reconnect with them and to hear more about their struggles and their achievements, personal and professional. And to learn the leadership lessons we can all take from these inspiring alumni.
There's always a view that this new technology, this time it's different, it's going to ruin everything for us. The fact pattern has been that usually new technologies make life a lot better for most people.
I'm joined today by Cully Cavness, President and COO of Crusoe Energy, which turns unwanted oilfield flare gas into supercomputing power and uses it to power data centres for blockchain processes, AI models and machine learning. Cully, it sounds very complicated and also fascinating, and I know we're going to learn a bit more about it throughout this conversation. But Crusoe has gone in just a few years from employing a few people to over 325 employees, and it's a US unicorn, raising over $1 billion. I think the last time the company was valued, Cully, at its Series C, it was valued at $1.75 billion. So it's great to have you with us for this podcast. This seems like such a big achievement, and I want to spend some time talking about how you got there. But first of all, please demystify it for us and tell us, in layman's terms, what it is that Crusoe Energy does.
Well, thanks for having me. It's really great to see you again. It's been too long since I was back in the UK at Oxford, and appreciate the opportunity to tell our story. In layman's terms, what we do is we really capture wasted or stranded or curtailed energy sources. We started with flared natural gas, which is that big ball of fire that folks have seen on photographs of the oil field. It's a problem that exists throughout the world. Really, wherever oil is produced, there's never a perfect match between the natural gas pipeline capacity and the production. And so wherever there's a mismatch, there tends to be flaring. We come with a system that can capture that excess natural gas that's being wasted and turn it into electricity. And these are typically in sites that are very remote. So there's not going to be an ability to sell that electricity to the grid or some other industry. It's really, really far out there typically. And what we do is we bring a modular data center to become the customer of the energy right on site. We also have a networking system to get that data off site. We like to say it's easier to move a bit than it is to move a molecule or an electron. All the energy sources we target are what we call climate-aligned energy sources, so very low or no carbon energy sources. And then on the computing side, we've also, over time, sort of diversified that. We started with Bitcoin mining, which was sort of the easiest way to get started and generate revenue. There's no customer who calls you angry if the data center goes offline in the middle of the night. Now a lot of our focus is on AI and machine learning. So that'll be the majority of our revenue stream by the middle of this year and going forward.
Thank you. That's a really helpful explanation, because this is not an industry that anybody would have heard of a few years ago. I'd like to talk about the cryptocurrency side of things and also, of course, artificial intelligence. But before that, I'd like to just go back to how you got into this industry. When you came to study at Oxford, you had already studied as an undergraduate, you'd studied geology, and then afterwards you went on to become an investment banker, an investment analyst. So very different from what you're doing now. Can you take me back a little bit to how you ended up studying the subject you studied at undergraduate level, your family influences, and how you got where you are now?
Yeah, in my family, there's been a long kind of history of oil and gas entrepreneurship. My grandfather and my father were both entrepreneurs in the American oil and gas industry. I was really raised around that industry. I was going to these oil conferences since I was about 14 years old, and even before that, helping my dad in his office with his business, and had a lot of exposure and learning from that. And really admired the industry in many ways, and went to college expecting to study geology and economics and probably pursue a career in the oil and gas industry. I went to a college in Vermont called Middlebury College, where, among other things, 350.org was launched. That was, at the time, a very prominent climate nonprofit that was advocating for limiting the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere to no more than 350 parts per million. And we had a variety of professors there who really were kind of influential in the early days of the climate movement, and my student body was really focused on that issue. So it became a tricky situation for me where I had this heritage in oil and gas, and I was really being exposed to the climate science, and I had a lot of kind of moral wrestling to do. And after graduating from that school, I actually took a Thomas Watson Fellowship program, and my interest was really like the morality of energy. So I traveled to Iceland, I traveled to China, Spain, Argentina, all with an eye towards working with energy project developers, power plant operators, financiers of energy projects. There's probably a whole conversation we could have about the contrast between Iceland and China, which really I think gets to the heart of the issue. But suffice it to say that I learned a lot from that. I took a job as a geothermal power project business development manager at a company called Global Geothermal, and again continued really working on the energy industry, but in the renewable side. Went to business school at Oxford and came back to my hometown of Denver, Colorado. Took an investment banking job at an energy focused investment bank. I still really wanted to stay in that energy focused part of the economy. And from there, I was recruited to be a vice president of finance at an oil and gas company. There, I really saw flaring firsthand, and it was again back to this kind of internal debate of the world does, for the time being, require a lot of oil, and it's sort of an essential building block of the economy. And it seems really embarrassing and senseless to burn natural gas as a byproduct of producing that oil.
Just want to go back to what you said about your family and growing up in an oil and gas family. I think in the past you said to me, my family were gold bugs, and this is the atmosphere I grew up in. This is the industry that I looked up to. What did your father think about the moral dilemma that you thought you had found yourself in?
I remember having a lot of difficult debates and fights around the dinner table about this tension between climate and energy supplies. And I think he has a lot of valid perspectives on that, which are still valid to this day, which is that the world does depend on this vitally. I mean, fossil fuels still produce more than 80% of the world's primary energy. And renewables have been growing very quickly, but total human demand for energy has grown even faster. And so fossil fuels continue to fill the gap and really enable human prosperity all around the world. And that's a really important thing. And in a lot of ways, that's a really, really good thing.
It must have been difficult along the way to square some of your views with the views of many people in the oil industry. But the whole climate debate now is, of course, at a different stage than it was even 10 years ago. Some would say that, an industry like Crusoe Energies, although it is dealing with an environmental issue through flaring, is also still very much part of that oil and gas industry, and particularly as the energy is used to power huge computers, which were used to mine Bitcoin initially.
Yeah, my view is that there's kind of two schools of thought in environmentalism. There's absolutism and there's incrementalism. And an absolutist environmentalist approach would say we should sort of ban the production of fossil fuels immediately. And I think most people would say that that is sort of politically and morally unacceptable from what that would do to human society perspective. And then there's a incrementalist approach, which is we should progressively make it cleaner and better until we get to our goal, which is that sort of long-term sustainable kind of carbon balance on inputs and outputs. The energy industry has a lot of inertia in it. These trends take time to change. They require tens of trillions of dollars, maybe hundreds of trillions of dollars to change the world's energy infrastructure, and that's going to take just decades, if not generations. So what can we do right now to improve the climate performance of these industries that we still have and need? I think we've found one it's economic, it's environmentally better than the status quo. Those are the kinds of virtuous cycles that we like to kind of see play out in business, where the profit motive can actually help take care of an environmental goal.
So the motive, not just the profit motive, but the motive to start a new business, usually requires an entrepreneur or two or three entrepreneurs to be filled with passion about one idea and totally driven about that idea. So where did that passion come from for you? Tell me a bit about how the idea for Crusoe got going and who your co-conspirator was in this.
Yes, my co-founder. I'm very fortunate to have a brilliant co-founder. His name is Chase Lockmiller. He and I went to high school together in Colorado, and even in high school, you could tell he had sort of another gear mentally, especially quantitatively. He went to go to MIT. He double majored in math and physics at MIT, and then got a master's degree from Stanford in computer science with a focus in artificial intelligence. So he was our sort of technology-oriented co-founder. And I had this really deep experience in the energy industry, having developed and financed and operated geothermal power plants, oil and gas assets. I sort of had a perspective on the energy side of it.
But when you were selling this idea, what was it at the time? And what kind of reaction did you get to the idea?
Yeah, I think early on, well, so early on, I'd been interested in Bitcoin since kind of the earlier days of Bitcoin. First, just kind of purchasing it, and then later getting into mining it just as a hobbyist. And yeah, we still tell the story of, my wife would come home and there's like hot wind coming out of the basement and some kind of buzzing sound. And why is our power bill 3 or 4 times higher this month than it was last month? And so I started just in a very simple level as a hobbyist mining Bitcoin as a side project to my oil and gas and energy career. And in that oil and gas business, I did see flaring, and I just recognized this is an enormous amount of wasted energy. Put aside all of the environmental and climate issues, it's just commercially really inefficient to waste all this energy. And then on the computing side, Bitcoin mining is a small subset of the total data center industry's electrical demand. And we should talk about where it's going from an electrical demand really driven by AI much more than anything else. It is going to reshape the world's supply and demand of electricity, and it already is. Wouldn't it be better if we could tap into a wasted energy stream rather than fire up new greenfield generation to do that, kind of regardless of what the source is? Capturing waste is always better. And so the early idea was maybe we can bring a containerized data center out into the oil field to capture this otherwise wasted flared gas. And I think it sounded pretty crazy to most people that we were going to catch a fireball and turn it into bitcoins, basically, is what the idea was. One of our early VCs has this tagline, gas to cash. And that was kind of his like simple way of trying to conceptualize the business model.
I think he said to me that you pitched the idea to a VC and they were incredulous.
One person told me no version of this will ever work. You don't get all pats on the back early on, but fortunately, Chase had been very successful early in his career and was in a position to fund the prototype development. So we partnered up, and he actually was the first investor in the company. And we built this prototype data center and found an oil field operator with a flare in Wyoming and approached them with this idea. They let us give it a shot. And it worked. And we were able to actually film a video of the operation and share that with some investors and show them, okay, here's where the gas comes in, here's where the power generation is. You push the button, the flare shrinks, 264 computers start blinking green. And then over satellite internet connection, we were receiving Bitcoin into our wallet right there in a very remote part of Wyoming. I mean, it's a dirt road for an hour and a half to get to this point, and you really can't see another structure all the way to the horizon in every direction. It's to be able to show that we could do it there. I think it demonstrated this could actually work, and there was a revenue model. And so we started raising venture capital that way. And it's, that industry of venture capital is an amazing industry in the sense that it's designed to take unbounded risks for things that may have unbounded upside, knowing that many of the risks will not pan out and they will go to zero, but the ones that do pan out can become very big outcomes and kind of compensate for the rest of the portfolio. I'm really grateful that exists in the United States. That attitude still exists. It's actually very rare to find that in the broader investing community.
Because you had two side business school alumni, the Winklevoss twins, investing early on, I think, in the business because they could see, in their words, that this was an industry that would support the development of cryptocurrency. And that in itself is controversial amongst the world's politicians, amongst the world's traditional bankers. What was the reaction to you as you began to build up the business in that way and develop the story around the reason for the business?
Yeah, I think there is something for everyone to like about this business model, really, and I think, headed off most of the key objections because of the way that we're sourcing the energy. So, given that this is an industry and it will consume energy, and it's happening globally, our view is again, what's the most optimum version of this environmentally? It's to go capture wasted energy and actually to mitigate methane emissions. It's carbon negative in the sense that if this didn't happen, you'd have more methane emissions going into the atmosphere, and you'd have that same computing load probably deployed on the grid, drawing some portion of fossil-based grid emissions. The other part of the story, which we should maybe talk more about, is Bitcoin mining is certainly not the only kind of computing that requires a lot of energy. And from early on, we had a broader view. Again, Chase's background, his master's degree was in artificial intelligence. So well before ChatGPT was something that anybody had ever heard of, we had already deployed GPU clusters into flare mitigation projects.
So GPU, can you just explain what it is?
Sure. Yes, graphics processing unit. So it's basically a type of computer chip that is very good at doing parallel computational processes as opposed to sequential, which a CPU, which is what everybody typically thinks of, is good at doing one thing, then the next, then the next. A GPU is good at doing many things in parallel. It turns out that kind of parallel computing is really what's needed to do artificial intelligence model training, especially the type for large language models. You're sort of analyzing lots and lots of data across a wide set in parallel, and it requires huge amounts of GPU computing with a lot of sophisticated networking to make it all kind of run simultaneously. And that's the kind of technology we started developing and deploying into our projects. We started seeing that this is an opportunity. We started allocating more and more and more of our budget into the GPU deployments, still, growing the Bitcoin mining business, but really exponentially enhancing the GPU business to the point where now it's about 30 to 40% of our revenue, and we'll cross over 50% this year. I think we'll be, really dominated by AI-driven revenue here over the next year or two, which is great.
What's your view, Cully, about the debate in Silicon Valley over controlling AI or harnessing the opportunities of AI? The whole issue around, friend or foe.
I think that every time a new technology is developed, humans seem to have this kind of debate. And there's always a view that this new technology, this time it's different, it's going to kind of ruin everything for us. The fact pattern has been that usually new technologies make life a lot better for most people. And there are definitely downsides and edge cases that we should think about and protect against. I think there's a role for government in that. But I also think there's a huge opportunity here to really make life a lot better for a large amount of people and create a lot of opportunities that we shouldn't go so far that we sort of stymie that and prevent that kind of growth and opportunity from occurring.
Before you became an entrepreneur, you had a different identity. Before you came to Oxford, you had a different identity. How do you think your identity has changed, or do you feel inside the same person?
That's an interesting question. I haven't been asked that question before. I think that there's been a consistent search for what's true about energy and the environment. That's always been a very key focus for me. And it's because it really matters to me. I wanted to lead a career and not have a regret later that I'd overlooked or not thought critically about some key moral issue. I've always been very entrepreneurial. I have a little thing framed in my office that's all my old business cards. I started a lot of things that didn't work out, and I learned from those. And I've been involved in a number of projects that did work out, and you learn from your successes as well. But I think that the job, it is a kind of fast pace of change to keep up with that kind of thing. But it's also been really exciting and really fun.
I know that you are a very driven sportsman. I think you've done Ironman competitions, or you've done a lot of competitive sport. And I just wonder how, in your personal life, you manage to balance every aspect of running, a company that's a unicorn, having a family, thinking about, your own future, and maintaining a steady kind of equilibrium for yourself.
Yeah, I sometimes think that the main job of an entrepreneur is to maintain kind of a stable mindset and just to kind of maintain a mental calm. It's the first, it's the foundation of everything else. You're not going to be very good if you're in a frantic mindset. So doing that can be hard. You are correct. And you're right. I used to do a lot of really intense endurance athletic contests and races and training. And really from my mid-teens through my mid-30s, that was my main stress relief. And I would be able to take on a lot of stress because I would be able to sort of blow it out with these huge workouts. And for me, that was a cycle that worked. I was able to kind of load up stress and then unload the stress in that way. At some point, that all caught up with me, and my lower back really started hurting. And so I had to kind of take a new approach, which is I still have a pretty rigorous morning routine, but it's more around maintenance. It's less, I'm not waking up and running a marathon before breakfast anymore, which is something I used to do on the weekends. I'm finding my way. It's just different. I have a family too now. I have a 2.5 year old and another on the way just any day now, actually. My wife might pop in here and tell me it's time to turn off the mic and head to the hospital. That really keeps me busy. And I think there's a little bit of simplification of life that has to happen there. You start having to say no to certain things.
Well, hopefully over the next few months, and by the time people are listening to this podcast, you will have learned how to deal with even less sleep. But you're on the roller coaster, Cully, because, there's only one way. That's an exit. You're an entrepreneur. You're either going to sell or have an IPO. You've raised so much money, something has to happen with that money. So how do you feel about those next few years, and what do you want most out of the challenges ahead? Because that's something that we asked you in your application form for the Oxford Executive MBA. We asked you to describe a challenge and think about how you were going to deal with it. I don't even know if you can think back to it, but what does that mean for you now with everything that's facing you in your business? What do you want to lie ahead? What do you really want to happen?
Well, just on the first part of your question around the exit, I don't know how other people think about this, but I don't daydream about being a public company executive. I think it probably is part of the path. If going through an IPO is something we've long talked about, and it does seem like the most likely exit, although it's not the end point. It's just another milestone, really. It shouldn't fundamentally change anything about the business, just the way the business finances itself. We've been able to raise a lot of money in the private markets, and I don't think at the moment we're forced to go public. At some point, I feel responsible to provide liquidity to our employees and to our investors. I think everybody's taken that risk with us, and they do ultimately want to have the ability to sell and kind of realize the value that was created from taking that risk. I think that's just kind of part of the deal, and that's fair. So your other question was about what are the challenges that lie ahead. We're sort of increasingly describing a vision to our employees of a 5-year plan, and that 5-year plan it's to build a 1 gigawatt portfolio of climate aligned energy sources and data centers, co-located basically, or as closely located as possible to where we can say this is the most climate aligned and very large scale portfolio of data centers. And that would move the needle on the total energy input into AI computing. By doing something at that scale, 1 gigawatt. You have to go big. These are very big global scale issues.
Cully, you sound seriously passionate about your business and about your purpose, the purpose of your business. If you were back in the lecture theatre at Oxford with your peers in that executive MBA class, what would you want to say to them?
I appreciate you saying that. I think having a passion, having a mission has actually been the main thing that is underneath the success of the company. When I go back and look at it, that's the reason why investors have invested. That's the reason why really talented employees have joined despite the risks. That's the reason we've been able to maintain a strong culture and a high kind of commitment level from the employees, is because people see that we're doing something that actually matters. It's something that they actually care about from a mission standpoint. And our mission is a climate-oriented mission. And I really can't imagine how hard it would be to operate a business where you don't have some kind of mission like that. I mean, there are many, many businesses that are good businesses. They make money. And from a practical commercial standpoint, they make sense. But the amount of kind of motivational juice and energy from having this authentic mission is so powerful that that's what I think everybody should be looking for, is what's the problem you want to solve in the world that matters to you, and then how do you design a business model around that, rather than starting with the business model of how can I make some money. It's how do you identify a problem and then turn it into an economic commercial solution that can scale. So that's probably the big one. And I think just staying true to the mission and not doing things that violate the mission is really a big part of the job now for myself and our executive team, is taking on the right kinds of projects that remain consistent with that climate mission. We're never perfect, but I think we've said no to a lot of things that would have violated that, and we say yes to the things that further that mission.
Cully, thank you so much. It's been a really insightful conversation, and it's been a pleasure, a personal pleasure, to talk to you again and to hear how your ambitions have been realised. So thank you for giving us so much time. I'll be back with another episode of The Application, so do look out for it wherever you usually get your podcasts. If you'd like to know more about Said Business School, take a look at the Oxford Answers section on our website, or check out the programme pages for more inspiring stories about our executive MBA alumni. The Application is produced by Philippa Goodrich and Oxford Digital Media. I'm Kathy Harvey, Associate Dean at Said Business School. Thank you for listening. Oh, look. Oh, we should have had the dog. Oh. What's the dog called?
The dog is actually named after one of your best whiskeys, Talisker.
Oh, right.
And her name is Tally.
Oh, Tally.
Don't kick